Let's get started with welcoming our speakers. Louis, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everybody. My name's Louis, based in London, and I'm a designer advocate at Figma and spend a lot of time thinking about design systems, talking to Figma users about design systems, and trying to think about how they can scale effectively, efficiently, globally, cross-platform, all that sort of stuff. So lots of time nerding out, and I'm looking forward to digging into today's session.
Hey everyone, I'm Rachel Green, and I'm a principal designer at SageSure, and we are in the insurance industry. And one of my areas of responsibility is our design system, Alto. And I've been working in design systems for about 6 years, and I was a product designer for about 10 years before that. And I'm very happy to be diving into Lightning Design Systems today and just talking shop with design system friends.
Love it. Charlie?
Hey, Charlie Weston. I'm a lead designer at Instabase. We're a AI data startup. So as you can imagine, design systems are incredibly important to how we create scale, uniformity across our platforms. Been a big fan of design systems for the last 10 or so years. I've built a handful of them in the past and excited to have in this talk.
Love it. I'm curious to know if you have generative UI already done within Instabase. Do you?
It's shipping next week.
Oh, really?
So we have something that are generative, but it's a slow progression. There's a lot of things to learn and understand there, but yeah, it's definitely cool to kind of see that stuff come out.
Love it, love it, love it. Steve?
All right. Hi. I'm a software engineer. I do front end. I do a lot of developer tooling mostly. Currently working for France Télévisions, which is the French equivalent to the BBC. I'm involved with Storybook as a contributor and as a community advocate. So I run events, I help our engineers publish add-ons. I'm also involved with quite a few design token projects. If you're an engineer, you want to contribute to Storybook, you want to like open source and outsource your design token tooling, feel free to reach out to me.
Love it. Great. And thank you very much for contributing a lot to the open source project. So this is really great. Yes. Great. And you all know me. I'm Farid. I'm living in Santa Clara. I will be in Config next week. So if you will be there, hit me a message on LinkedIn. I'll be happy to catch up in person. Let's get started. Great. So the goal for this session is to inspect and reflect on how Salesforce Lightning Design System is used within the Salesforce products to learn best practices and grow together. One important thing, we are not here to critique. We are not inviting people on purpose who are actually working within the Salesforce design system because we know creating and doing design systems is hard. So we don't need to know the real reasons behind the things. We just trying to understand and find some interesting learning opportunities here. We are trying to imagine what if we are working within the Lightning design system as a part of this group, and we see some interesting opportunities within the products who are using the Salesforce design system. What will be our actionable steps there? And yes, so we have, if you would like to join our next sessions as well, feel free to join our Slack. The next session will be with Wise design system. So it's pretty exciting. Great. So let's get started. Here we will start putting a couple of things from our secret speakers only board to the public one. And we can start quickly with understanding of how Salesforce is working. Here you will be able to see the product pages that we went through in order to inspect them. So Salesforce is a platform that allows you to track leads. I guess it's mostly used by the sales folks. It also works for other audiences as well, but this is some kind of main CRM system that everyone knows. So we were very curious to know and see how the Lightning design system is being used within this specific product. The licenses might be different because my experience is different from the Rachel's experience for some reason. I've used the trial version for that, just wanted to disclose that it might not be the main product or there might be multiple products within the Salesforce. We just took this one as an example. To kick things off, let's start with going through their documentation. So, any thoughts?
Just
quick
before that,
reactions? Please.
just before you jump in, if you look at the previous screenshots, you could even see that the logo color is different on the top left and top right images. The blue is different.
Oh my God.
So I think
True.
there's definitely differences within even just individual screens.
Okay, and now we start. Yeah, so, but like, why do you think the reason is? Because some products didn't update their brand, or maybe they don't have like central repository for branding materials?
I think if you go to there's like an old Google login page somewhere where they set up a logo from 2009 or something. And I think it's just that authentication flows are kind of the last places you check because you focus on the core experience. And that logo is probably just stored in some other server somewhere.
Yeah, that's a good point. Hopefully, tokens, and by the way, we will have a discussion about design tokens or styling hooks, the way how they name it. So let's dive deeper into documentation. Louis, would you like to start maybe and share your thoughts on their Figma documentation that they have within their community?
Yeah, there's three surfaces, at least what we all found in their documentation, where you've got the Storybook, and then you have the zero height installation, and then you have the Figma community files. And the Figma files are excellent. Honestly, I would recommend everybody check these out because the in-file documentation is some of the best that I've honestly seen. And it's just very thorough, very nicely laid out, and not too dense. I think that's very important. There's not too much information. There's enough to get started and feel like you want to go and use the stuff rather than just spend all your time reading it. So I just really admire the annotations that they've added, the way they've structured it, and the sort of decisions they've made, in particular with things like when a component is one or many components. So you've got an example. Just here you can see variant 1 and variant 2 in the bottom left. They split their components up basically by type a lot of the time. So if, for example, they have different button components instead of building one big mega variant component in Figma. And I think we could probably talk about that for a while. There's trade-offs, pros and cons for different approaches of like mega components versus split for performance, for adoption, for usability. I personally like how they split them up.
Love it, love it. Other reactions?
I really appreciated they had a grab and go section in the Figma library. So if you're inside of a component, you can just like copy. I'm just looking at breadcrumbs, or I think Alert probably had that too. Yeah, the grab and go examples. I had not seen that before and really appreciated how quickly, if you're in here looking at something, you can just grab it and paste it in.
This is interesting, indeed.
And I feel like having this a little bit easier than having just things in an asset library where you're pulling things from a ordered list, but this gives you a little more context on usability, distinction, how and when to use it.
There is a typo in that description there, though. It says bead crumbs instead of breadcrumbs. Just on the grab and go, also love that. I would like to see examples with content in as well. I'm not sure if they have separate libraries where people build their own fully formed content examples. For example, a breadcrumb for the dashboard or a profile or something with the labels already pre-filled. That would be pretty cool.
Great. Love it, love it. Great. We can go through their storybook just quickly by just quickly scanning it. I know whom to ask for reactions. Steve, do you want to share your thoughts on their storybook?
I feel there's not too much to say on it. I think it's evident that it's not used as the primary source of documentation because for many components you don't have interactive examples where all of the different properties can be used. And this is something when I was looking through the Zero Height and Storybook, something that I noticed because I was trying to understand some slight variations in how components are described in the documentation versus implemented. And I actually didn't have the tools with that Storybook instance to properly investigate it. There aren't necessarily either some of the newer features. There's a lot of test-related features now in Storybook that can be quite nice. Also to explain how a component works, I hadn't seen some of that. But it's like very well documented still in the sense that it varies every component. And if you're a designer and you need to see how it's implemented, this is where you go. So it's great that it's here.
Steve, I have a question. So as you can see from within their documentation, they are just showing the stories, right? Just a quick previews of the component. The one that I'm using the most is Carbon as a reference, and they have a lot of things explained right here. So maybe it's more like philosophical questions to everyone, like where and how you feel like how much information we need to show, because within the storybook, the limitation is only engineers can change, or design engineers who have access to the Git repositories, right? And so it's not very easy. For Figma, it's only designers who can make changes, right? Maybe some organizations, so you could share that. Maybe some other organizations have interesting ways of collaborating on the documentation part than Figma as well. Just high-level question here, exploration question, like how much information you need to put into like all these different platforms? I can hear myself.
Yeah, Chuck, oh yeah.
Thank you.
Look, if I were to give it a go, that question, I think you're always working within an organization. Your organization has ways to manage information in general, to manage collaboration that predate the design system. And I feel strongly that this is what you should use whenever you don't need something highly specific. There is not that much that needs to be documented in design systems that is highly specific to the point where a tool like Notion or Confluence doesn't work. It's primarily component APIs that don't fit in that, and that for a storybook is good. Yay. But I would say a lot of the design system specific tools don't necessarily justify their pricing or the ease of making changes that they have, compared to a tool that is already available for everyone within your org, where you can leverage brand, you can leverage accessibility expertise, you can leverage other functions, also managers, to help build good documentation. But this is a controversial topic.
Yeah.
Yes.
Lou, I would love to hear your thoughts, because you know all the best practices.
I wouldn't say that, but I can try. Similar line to Steve is that different docs for different places for different people, and you wouldn't need to know necessarily the React code as a designer in Figma, but in Storybook you might not need to know the layer structure in the Figma instance. So splitting those up for the right things for where you would need it. I think what people typically try to do is build one system for all in documentation terms, and then it becomes bloated, heavy, hard to maintain, doesn't really suit anybody's use case. What you then end up with is lots of different things which need different levels of maintenance at different points in time. And that can become, I guess, a full-time job for many people rather than trying to do this one system for all. What I think is quite unique, or maybe not unique, is in this system in particular, they've got these three surfaces and they have different levels of information in each one. Like the storybook is pretty light, but I kind of agree with Steve on this, that you don't maybe need to document everything. Like an alert component, do we need to know what an alert component does, or do we just know that it's an alert component and use it when there's an alert? So going to the nth degree on maybe new patterns, maybe, and then zero docs on assumed knowledge through experience.
Love it, love it. And Steve, the main limitation for me personally with using Storybook, it's only like web platform, right? I've heard that they were working on mobile component documentation. Is there support for that right now?
Not quite. There have always been people who are trying to run like native code. At French Television, we actually run some of our TV platforms through emulators for Storybook in some instances, but it's not exactly like stellar performance. There are certainly some people who have tried integrating tools like Firebase, I would say at the end of the day, it's not something that can be maintained by the Storybook team. There's too many products out there. But there is a system that allows you to build your own frameworks, and there are people doing that mainly for slightly smaller web frameworks, Solid.js or Nuxt. And I've heard calling Nuxt a small framework nowadays, but people come up with their own implementations of frameworks and pushing these boundaries. But yeah, that's always the limitation that you need to relate on web.
Love it, love it. Great. And let's dive into the main documentation website that they have. Recently moved into Zero Height. Let me open the link. Any reactions, maybe Charlie? Do you have any high-level thoughts, reactions, reflections on the way how they documented everything?
I'm using laid out, I think, an easy way to assess. I was surprised just on the homepage experience, right? When you first land on there, it's not more signposting for kind of orientation guidance. This definitely feels like it's built for a team that knows what they're going into versus somebody that's net new maybe to design systems. And just that level of hand holding is always different based on team implementation space. But I mean, basics, get started, components. Love the breakout. There's a lot of deep linkage. Yeah, it's a very solid system on surface.
I agree. My favorite part is always anatomy, so I love checking this kind of stuff. Great. Rachel, do you have any thoughts on documentation part overall, and we can move into the components?
Or I actually found the homepage beautifully designed, especially for Zero Height, which is somewhat restrictive in the homepage. I'm also running a Zero Height webpage and our design system, and I found this pretty inspiring and the design very consistent. Whereas in their products, I didn't get that same feeling as far as holistic look and feel. And yeah, I appreciate that each component has the same tabs at the top. So if you know you're going in to look for accessibility, you always know where to find it. Yeah, and I definitely appreciated the section at the bottom of each component. I think it's in the usage, possibly, with related components. And it actually, I thought it was just a description of each component, but it actually talks about how they're related to that component, which I've already shared with my team, and I think we're going to adopt something similar.
Love it, love it. Great. So we went through the documentation, just a quick highlights on the things that they have. Right now, we can dive deeper. We have patterns and we have components. And at the end, we can also discuss the styling hooks. Let's dive deeper into the patterns right now. I'll put a couple of things from our secret board right here. And we can dive into the notification patterns. 1 second, notifications. Does anyone wants to kick us off and just give high-level perspective on reflections on the notifications, how they are documented, and why you think it's interesting for people to what kind of things people can pick up as a good practices here? Louis, you mentioned that you really like welcome mat, so maybe...
Yeah, this is just purely from naming convention. It was just a very nice new name for me. I haven't seen welcome mat before, and it makes certain sense. I know exactly what it is, and it's really just a nice way of saying, make a component name that works for you rather than trying to follow some other convention from another company. The thing that we did notice was that welcome mat hadn't been migrated to the new version, which is fine. Things take time. But we just, loved the naming convention and welcome mat. Something I did notice about notifications was it's very detailed. There's lots of different types of notification in position and style and how they arrive. And that to me was kind of confusing at the start because it's like an encapsulating name for lots of different things. And I just wonder whether they are actually just separate entities themselves, documented separately. That's always a back and forth of trying to do everything in one place or not. And they've gone that route. But if you look at the examples, this one, this green and the red one, they're in very different places. And I don't know if it's immediately obvious that you can use the same component in those different places with those different contexts.
We spoke last time during our previous inspect and reflect sessions that the decision log might be something helpful. But do you have any, I guess, the decision log when it comes to patterns, how people to make the right decision, which component family to use in specific scenario? Have you seen some really good examples how patterns are documented? Because I was always thought that the patterns is the part of the documentation that allows us not only have designers and engineers and accessibility experts working together, but also product managers and QA team. The reason why I say QA is because actually they are writing those kind of interactions within all the components that we could summarize and capture and synthesize all the best practices as the solidified pattern that could be reused. But I was also always thinking that patterns, specifically within the design system, is a good opportunity to bring more disciplines like QAs and product managers.
That becomes harder though with a catch-all component. This notification component, they have what is effectively a toast style notification. But then also, if you look at the bottom left example here, that's an entire notifications panel, like a desktop notification style, which is a very different context to a toast, but they're still grouped under the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of breaking my head a little bit because I don't immediately think of them in the same context. Same name, maybe. And just kind of back to your question about how people would normally go, if split between design and development, I think. In Figma, a lot of teams end up making more components with different names for different end use cases. And that might sacrifice parity between design and code, but would probably increase adoption on the design side. And that's that back and forth again that we mentioned earlier.
But it's interesting looking at
ahead,
the documentation through notifications because they do take like a macro lens on this of trying to cut notifications against urgent, standard, and street for like how they should be served up to users. So it is a large canvas of different ways that notifications can be used: toast, modals, the welcome mat. But I think part of why this is broken out into the pattern section versus maybe seeing this as a component by itself is more of that context for product managers, QA engineers, anyone that's like wanting to understand maybe how to use this in I imagine Salesforce is very system of systems building, right? There's probably a lot of interdependencies and connective tissues, and having some type of working schema around how to actually implement them and how users should expect to kind of experience them. It is nice to see that wrapping document and given examples in Storybook, but also within the files itself.
Love it. See if you want to add something, right?
Yeah, I was going to say, I suspect there are different components behind all of its patterns for notification. In fact, in the notification subgroup, you have three in the documentation, you have 3 links. The one in the middle with patterns does explain every single pattern in a scale, basically from the least to most urgent. And it points to components that have been implemented for that, but I suspect they're not all ported to V2 yet, which is why we haven't been able to in the sidebar. That makes sense to me as well, because when it comes to notification, if you want to implement accessible notifications, the markup that you're using is very specific. So it's very likely that we have different components on the code side. I think it's actually quite well designed that it's presented through the purpose that each of the different patterns has, rather than directly through the names of the components you can have, because then it guides you as a learner to the system through like actually thinking about your specific use case, and you have to express and think about your use case in order to find the components that you need. I think this is a very good thing to do. I was quite pleased with this documentation online.
The thing on that image, that map there, you've got alert, which to me seems very urgent. I don't know, but it's in the presentation, it's maybe discrete. And I guess they've got like this contrast of, you need to do something now, by the way, or maybe you don't. Because
it's the one that is used for the trial message. It's another banner. And it's maybe the name of that specific component that could have been different. But yeah, it's likely not that urgent because it's just staying there forever.
Yeah, but I guess here the alert is shows caution state, right? Or the alert state. Yeah, I agree. But do you have better ways to represent this kind of patterns? I believe this is the area where design system industry is not mature enough. We are still like trying to figure it out how to make patterns better. Do you have any thoughts? Because I was thinking also, I feel like decision tree helps a lot, where people can answer some questions and it will tell you, okay, like in that case, you need to use alert. In that case, you need to use actually notification tile. I was also thinking, and they have also covered that within the documentation, the different positions, the different like how like things could be a part of the page if you would like to alert the user about the overall page experience or specific flow experience or specific component experience. Do you have any of your favorite examples how patterns are documented on the market right now? Rachel, maybe do you have any favorite?
Sorry, I
Yeah,
was
no
looking for my
worries.
mute.
Okay.
I was looking for my mute button.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Carbon, Polaris, Wise, they're all doing a really great at, at pattern documentation, but not all of design systems really even need pattern specifically. Like Atlassian was one of my favorite design systems, and they don't have a pattern section. Gestalt just has components and foundations. So we're actually trying to work this out currently in our design system, whether we do document patterns, and if we do, is it in Storybook, is it in our zero height instance? And we're still just thinking about maybe we do what Gestalt is doing and just organize components by category. It might make them a little bit more difficult to find. But I do appreciate what Lighting has done here, not just in this diagram, but they also have, similar to a decision tree like you were mentioning for Read, they have a table that has checkboxes on it, and it might not be as easy as a decision tree. That's where I'm leaning as well. But they also have a pie chart at the very bottom. Yeah, here's the table, and then at the bottom they have a pie chart that helps product teams figure out like how much of the urgent and standard and discrete notifications should you have like in your product total, which I actually didn't notice until the third or fourth time I looked at this page, because the typography I think is pretty tiny there. But I liked that it gave this overall balance, and that's what this pie chart is showing, is overall you should just mostly have standard and then a nice balance between discrete and urgent. And I think these kinds of visuals and presenting this information in multiple different ways is really encouraging self-service, which is critical for large teams, but also for small teams. Myself, when you're just a design system team of one or two people, these kinds of things can be really helpful in supporting your team.
Love it. Yeah, I agree. Thank you very much. Yeah, I really like this kind of table that helps, again, to explain people. We can dive deeper into the components that I was able to find related somehow to this notification pattern. A lot of things here are to discuss, so I'm not saying that should be a part of the notification pattern. The first things, as you can see here, is the alert banner. It might not be, maybe the naming here, I chose the wrong naming. Maybe it's more just a subscription notification or something that lets people see on the top of the page that how many days of trial they have within this specific product. I also added this thing to discuss. Not sure if that should be a part of notifications, or it will be better to come up with something other pattern family, like maybe activation patterns, where they are welcoming user and trying to speed up their onboarding experience by showing some interesting practices here. Not sure if that should be a part of notification or not, but that's shown within the page, within the welcome page. Other things here are feature pop-over notification. And again, maybe there is another dimension of patterns that we need to cover, is not the notification itself, but popovers, how things could be, how we could show more information within the page through this additional like popovers or models or something else. So it's not about like notifying user, it's more about like giving a little bit more context here. I also tagged notification tray, but I don't have any notifications there. It's empty. As we discussed, that's a part of this notification patterns. This edit error popover, also a question, like, should it be a part of notification? Because this is more about the experience within the app, right? I was thinking that maybe having another dimension of patterns as how we are informing people of errors, where they are missing required fields, or there are some errors within the server, there are some errors within the fields, etc. And the last one here is import model. Again, I feel like it's completely out of notifications, but I thought that it might be something similar to the welcome mat. Maybe they were inspired by it, but I guess this is not a part of notification at all. This is more like a page where they can there might be another pattern where they are onboarding users. And I feel like this start with like import model and spotlight model will be part of the activation. So my question is, first of all, do you believe that those kind of notifications could be separated? Do you feel like they are confusing people more, or is just, again, we are in this stage of evolution where we didn't figure out how to document patterns yet, and hopefully soon we will be able to have it more standardized. The way how we are all agreed that the search bar component or button components are the components, maybe within the patterns, we will have that maybe in the next year. We'll actually solidify those kind of patterns, and then people will just start adding examples there.
On that start with contacts dialogue, I'm assuming that you could have an error there. If you upload a file that, like a CSV file that's corrupt or something, I'm assuming there'll be some feedback somewhere that tells you that it's corrupt within that dialogue or not. I don't know. It might just close it, but it's hard to know. But I think centrally there's layers within layers within layers happening there.
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of all comes under the bucket of feedback and what you're trying to tell the user and where you're trying to tell them and how you're trying to tell them. The we hit a snag example is also kind of contextual. It wouldn't be there on like on load. It would only be there when something goes wrong, I assume. And which is like a time-based message, but doesn't fall within the group of components that we did that before.
I would say, generally speaking, we're not equipped to discuss whether a pattern is well presented, whether it's the best presentation possible, or whether it contains the right things without knowing the history of the organization. Looking at the definition of the notifications pattern, the kind of subtitle in the documentation, it says, notifications are messages that deliver information and insights to users, helping drive engagement and productivity. Exactly, right. And I feel like I would have named it communication personally. And this is the word that I like because I do see the relevance in presenting all the moments where you take control away from your user and you start pushing them towards a new interaction path. I think it's interesting to regroup them. But it might be that there's a very good reason why at Salesforce that word spoke to more designers, or why at Salesforce maybe there were more issues with picking the wrong component in terms of the urgency scale, which would then kind of justify presenting them first through that scale. So I think it's difficult to analyze. Also, it's interesting, like we ask questions and we see this from an outside perspective, and then we can try and guess why. But I would rather guess why than say, well, maybe that doesn't fit because we never quite know why it's been done that way.
Agree.
Yeah. I mean, again, like going through like the data implementation, like they do make that nuance between two things, right? It's like that sense of urgency. How important is it for a user to get that context, and then subdividing that context by, is it a notification as like a traceable element or something that is dismissible feedback, or is it something that's like interface driven, like that sign up, convert files where it's weird, right? It's not as usual that you would consider a modal as a notification, but if you'd hit an action before that then triggers you to go through a system prompt where, it's a core action, main flow to take, how do you present that to somebody in a sense that it's imperative, it's clear that if you take action from there, you can walk that to the point of getting that to be a notification, right? Like how do you alert somebody to the fact of here's a set of actions or tasks to take on or consider.
Love it, love it. Yeah, I agree. Great. Let me pull up other things that we have in our FigJam file, speakers only FigJam file. So we could dive into some other component families, but I feel like it might be interesting to go through the styling hooks. So I'm sure Louis and Steve, they have a lot of thoughts on design tokens or Figma variables. So we'll love to hear your reactions on the styling hooks itself. I guess they were the ones who used design tokens before, and now they are moving into the styling hooks terminology. So do you have any thoughts, reactions on that part? Louis, would you like to start?
Steve's gonna go first.
Okay. Yeah, look, I think it can make sense, right? If you look at let's call them design token for now, just for argument's sake. If you look at that documentation, it's very much technical documentation. It's very much geared towards engineers. It's amusing actually that it's in zero height and it's not using the design token feature in zero height because they've probably needed something tailored. The fact that it's clearly geared towards one group, it hints that what we're providing here is more of a collection of design token values, a collection of references. If we talk about what design tokens are, I'm going to quote Gina Ann, who is one of the co-chairs of the W3C Design Token Community Group. She says design tokens are a technology agnostic methodology, architecture, and process for scaling design. And when we look at design tokens from the perspective of consumers in Figma or in code, we're only looking at the part where we have the outcome, we have the deliverables of that methodology. But design tokens are not just names and value collections, they're also implicit and explicit rules on how to use them correctly. Explicit often in the form of documentation, implicit often in the form of the way that tokens are named and the taxonomies that go with them. And if you look at Figma, for instance, Figma implements variable scoping that allows you to make sure that specific variables are used in specific contexts. This is a way to implement implicit rules of design token because the variables themselves, just like the styling hooks, they're just the deliverables of the design token process. They're just the content part and not the guideline part. And the guideline part still needs to exist. So I'm okay with them having a different name. It can make sense when you're talking to different audiences.
Love it. And what's the thing about the structure within the styling tokens? Because they are covering only, couple aspects of the tokens. Do you feel like that's pretty much it? Or maybe in the future we could expand those sets of things that are, this one? Colors, font, border radius, shadows, sizing, spacing. Because in some cases, those kind of things could be, there might be some platform limitations, right? Maybe for iOS, the same thing cannot be used. And that's why I remember Amazon created this style dictionary that allows you to get some like raw data and convert it into like platform specific tokens. What's the thing about that? Like how the style dictionary and design tokens are fitting into this styling hooks?
Most certainly, they're using your style dictionary of Terrazzo to generate those hooks. That at this stage is industry standard practice. The thing is, the most limiting tools when it comes to delivering brand assets to engineering teams are going to be the documentation tools and most likely the design tool. And I'm saying documentation tools specifically because it's really difficult to build something that can comprehend any kind of data and content and then visualize it and allows it, like index it, allows you to browse it. And it makes sense that token documentation tools themselves are still limited at the moment. Mm-hmm. This is also something that we're touching on in the ongoing discussions we have. We have a request for comment open that aims to provide slightly more consistently formatted data for built design tokens that can bring the gap between what we have in code, so the names that we use for design tokens with styling hooks or CSS variables in code, and the names that we use in other contexts like Figma or Penpot, and the names that we use in the source of truth. I think there isn't enough maturity yet that the tools themselves in the documentation space can properly showcase what can be done. But looking at this design system in particular, there's a CSS utilities page as well. And that page hints that there are other tools and utilities that make sense for engineers, that can be built, maybe can be automated, but that don't really fit the canonical definition of what a design token is.
And how do you envision this documentation space for tokens? Do you think that every token, like you would like to have a dedicated page for each token or token section and then show more, like how do you envision this like part, like how to document those tokens? Do you feel like this is not enough, or would you like to have something more?
The grouping of the tokens, which values you show, which tokens you show, how you split them, whether you show mods together or separately, whether you separate backgrounds from foregrounds and whatnot, that's very org dependent as well. So at France Télévisions, we have like roughly, we're reaching 20 different tech stacks where we need to deliver tokens ultimately. Of course, we can have a single page with all the different values, and almost all of the stacks have different names that are used for these tokens on the code side. In some of the stacks, we have different sources of truth with different token sets on the source side, and that's normal. We have a joint taxonomy and then a few variations, and it wouldn't be possible for a generic tool to build the perfect documentation for us. And that's where the DTCG and before the DTCG people who have some time and some energy to put in that space need to go further in formalizing the ways that we can group and present tokens, the way that we can organize mods, the way that mods relate to one another, the way that types of tokens can be presented and filtered and deployed and distributed. There's a lot of formalizing that needs to happen before generic tools can emerge.
Interesting. Do you envision some kind of playground where people can see how tokens are used with a specific component and then change modes, change themes, and see how those kind of things are applied? Or
Handoff.com does that. Tiny open source offering, not very famous.
Held?
They do. Handoff, like a handoff, like a design handoff with French accent. Yeah.
Interesting. Oh, it's like Figma. And while we are touching Figma, Louis, maybe you have some thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, honestly, it took me a really long time and many reads of the styling hooks docs to kind of get what it was. It felt at first kind of unnecessarily wrapping something and like branding something. Like I kind of got there in the end after reading it 10 times. On the practical side, a lot of the colors dug into them, and they kind of seem like they're straddling primitive and semantic a lot of the time, where they've got this sort of like romantic approach to color. Their like semantic color palette has ramps within them, so their warning colors have an entire set of like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Their warning palette has 10 shades of warning.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that doesn't strike clarity. That to me introduces questions. And I would need to go and read documentation or maybe ask somebody which warning color is the right warning color for the use case I need versus what I think a semantic intention should be of kind of being able to determine where a color would be used by the name itself. And I think they're kind of bouncing between this very broad system of color availability and then very specific intention with semantic naming conventions.
But do you believe that these like styling hooks are so foundational that they are not actually dependent on the product or domain where they operate? So if we will have some kind of standard, like HTML standards, right? But we will have some kind of token standard. We don't need to overcomplicate things. Can we find this kind of standard that could be applied to all the tokens because it's too foundational, or you still see that there is some uniqueness needed to be supported.
I think people generally end up in a similar direction with like focusing very specifically on color here. People have a brand color, they have a warning color, they have a positive or a success color. Like people generally end in the same place on those. Where you get deviation is like for example here, surface. Personally, don't like the word surface because it doesn't really like everything's a surface or everything's on something, everything's a background effectively. So it's like, let's call it a background. If I look at specifically on like surface 1, 2, 3, I don't know whether that's like a Z index implied or whether they go on top of each other or they go underneath each other. And I'd have to go and read something to find out. I think that you pair a surface container with an on surface number. But then I also saw examples where they were mixed numbers. So surface 1 might have had a on surface 3 on top of it. And I just kind of got a bit lost in that. So global convention, I would love to see that. I just don't think it's ever going to happen because every company is different and requires different use cases for different platforms and people. If this works for them, amazing. But my very fresh eyeballs on the color system, I was a little bit confused.
But maybe some other people on the call can share their thoughts on, can tokens be standardized? No.
I think within organizations, yeah, there's always a path to that. I don't globally between company to company, it seems maybe that's the task for AI to solve the perfect global color palette structure.
That's an interesting thought because for those kind of semantics, AI can do things at scale much better. So yeah. But Steve, if you have thoughts, please share.
Yeah, I was gonna say on the side of standardization, I think it's not possible.
Not
And it's
possible.
not desirable.
Mm-hmm.
Essentially, when you build a token system, you're going to want to support a brand expression and a specific set of interaction needs. And it's very difficult to make all the brands in the world function with the same taxonomy. If you take Google, material design historically was a system where you would have a mid-tone, highly saturated brand color, and it would be able to compute all these different colors around, right, and provide very well integrated experience with components that work great. If you are working at Merck, which is a very large biomedical research supplier, they have a crazy brand with cyan and magenta and then light green backgrounds. It's extremely colorful. It's like a play on surfaces, and it's not something you could possibly implement within a system that was designed for material. It's sometimes not possible to do that. And even within the same product line, you can see that you have slightly different interaction needs, say for showing that something is toggled, but something is selected. In B2B, you have a lot of selection. And finding the right amount of contrast between selecting something, hovering over something, focusing, actually activating, you need to be mindful of how that plays. In Salesforce, you can see as well that the info color doesn't really work with the brand color. So you need to have this kind of judgment at the intersection of what you need to build in your product and what you have in your brand. And then you entrank them in your taxonomy. So I think we'll have standardization in terms of how to express different levels of prominence within a taxonomy system, what kind of categories of tokens can exist, and so on. I think that will get standardized at the time. But building the actual systems that everyone's using, I don't think so. And I agree with Charlie that AI has a role to play. If you can build a formal representation of what you want to system and some guidelines, then AIs can build it for you, hopefully.
Have you seen any good examples?
I think Donny Donato is working on something to that end. I think he's hinted at that recently and then basically concluded that he needed to rewrite the book that he's about to publish on design tokens on that. So you should speak about it soon enough, hopefully.
Love it. We had Donny 2 times during Inspect and Reflect sessions. So that will be great to dive deeper into that. Great. I know that we are short in time. We have only a couple of minutes left. So I will leave a couple of things that we've tagged before as a part of I went through the accordion elements, avatar component family, button groups, and cards, etc. There are some interesting things related to accordion. They are not visually the same as documented within the design system, but that might be related to the fact that they just didn't have enough time to update. And also, there are some interesting cases when the accordion element has different sizing option, where within the documentation, again, maybe in some cases, in some use cases, the product goes earlier than the design system documentation. In some cases, design system documentation, like components are going forward before the product itself. Yeah, so all the recordings will be available. I will share everything here. We have a board. If you'll have any questions, feel free to reach out to all the speakers that you see. I guess LinkedIn might be the best option to reach out if you'll have any following questions. But thank you very much for joining the session today. It was a pleasure to chat with you. We covered design tokens. We covered patterns. I feel like that's two areas that still need some exploration. And for the components, I feel like we are feeling confident within the industry. At least me, personally. I don't know how about others. Yeah, so thank you very much for joining the session. I'll see you next time.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.